Welcome back to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone, the conclusion of Race and Christianity. This is episode 3. Thanks for joining us today. I just want to say, if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, please go back and listen to it. It's a great episode where Jareth and I talk about more on the political side. Today we're going to talk about more on how we relate it to our walk with God and our walk with Christ. Thank you for listening to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone.
So Christian principles have to be applied no matter what we're talking about. We talked in the last episode about excommunication and we were talking about, homosexuality and how the church deals with it. And we talked about applying Christian principles to it,
Right.
Loving people being very foundational.
Yes.
And that has to be, with race, with any issue, but with race, this has to be foundational. Loving other people has to be foundational.
Yeah. I mean, when you come down to the brass tacks of it, is there really different races?
Right.
There's
That's
different
a good question.
ethnicities. There's different cultures.
Yeah, it looks like from what I've been reading up on this and listening to a lot of different opinions on it, and from every side, because I wanted to get as much of a whole picture as I could of it.
Sure.
But I believe that the truth of the matter is race, as we think of it, of different races, is not a thing biologically. And of course there's differences. Obviously the color of skin among different people is different. But here's the thing about that. This is true, if you take people from the lightest complected person on earth to the darkest and put them all in a line, you could not tell a difference between the skin tone of any people in people in the line, because it's so gradual and there's so
And
many
we're all
differences.
just shades of brown.
Really,
Anyway.
we are.
Yeah.
And so there's no race as far as biologically. We have differences, and a lot of that is maybe our ancestral where we grew up, where our ancestors grew up. If our ancestors lived in England for 1,000 years, and that piece of dirt, they were going to develop language and a lot of cultural things, a lot of things differently, and even physical characteristics differently than somebody living in Africa, in the Horn of Africa or something. So those things are not really biological. It's not really that there's different races. There's different cultures, ethnicities, and race, as we think of it today in these discussions, is really a cultural construct from like the 1600s or the
Right.
Yeah.
So I think when we say race, kind of defining the term a little bit, we are depicting ethnicity, we're depicting cultural differences. We're not necessarily saying black versus white.
No.
It's more or less that sense, because, foundationally, we're all created in the image of God.
Absolutely.
And so we'll call ourselves the human race. Hypothetically speaking, if there was intelligent life out there in the world or out in the universe somewhere, and they were to show up here, are they going to single out this one group of people? No. They're going to single out the human race.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what
they would think
are.
of us as the human race.
Yeah.
So we have to acknowledge, that there are differences in different groups of people based on things like, you said ethnicity, nationality, just culture, community culture. I mean, there's differences in people regardless of, skin color or anything like that, in different cities.
Exactly. We're from a small town in Indiana, but just a town 20 minutes north of us, completely different people.
Oh, yeah, the culture is so different.
Yeah.
And I see it a lot because I travel for work a lot, and I go to different cities in the U.S., and some areas are going to be... I go to hospitals, and I'm in hospitals for work a lot. So I'll drive to maybe Oklahoma City or Kansas City, or I'm going to Iowa. When this airs, I'll actually have just gotten back from Iowa. So I I see a lot of different dynamics as far as, I may go to one city and most people are, well, small town Seymour, where we live, Seymour, Indiana, it's mostly white.
Yeah.
Mostly a lot of Lutherans. I mean, there's a lot of mostly Christian, but there's a lot, but a lot of Lutherans. But there's a lot of similarity. It's pretty narrow as far as culture goes.
Sure.
But in some cities, I'll see the same thing. In one area of a big city, I might see a predominantly black or predominantly in some places in Oklahoma where we go, we'll see a lot of Native Americans. Because there are a lot of Native American nations out there, and we don't see that as much here. So and the culture is different from these different groups,
right?
And it's not good or bad; it's different.
Yeah, exactly. I think. Unfortunately, we can't integrate for some reason, and I don't know why.
And I don't know if we really want to completely integrate everything.
Yeah,
because some things in culture. Are good in different cultures.
I mean, we take major cities like Los Angeles or New York. They have neighborhoods that are predominantly black.
Mm-hmm, right.
They have neighborhoods that are predominantly white. And they have neighborhoods that are predominantly Asian or Latino. I mean, bring all those people together, they make the one city, but culturally they have their different sections. Yeah,
and a lot of times they do life in their little subsection of that city. And I remember being in LA and driving around and seeing signs like, here, now we're in Chinatown. We'll drive a little bit and we're in little Tokyo or we're in little Armenia. And it's kind of crazy.
Not to bring politics up again, but I think that's what makes this country really, really special.
It is.
We talk about the melting pot of this. I mean, we're the only country in the world, to my knowledge, that allows that to happen.
Yeah, I think it is really at the level that the U.S. does, and I don't want to see that go.
I don't either.
I love it. I think it makes it a rich texture.
And it's vibrant.
It is.
And diverse. And I think we could say that about Christianity, though. I think that's what Christ really wanted us to be like. In that sense. We weren't supposed to be some all-exclusive group that sometimes that we're made out to be.
Right.
And I think, the Old Testament in the Israel, we have that group. God almost wanted to separate. Mm-hmm. He wanted them to be different. He wanted them to be God's people. But at some point in the line, he made a decision that he wanted to change that. He wanted the Gentiles to be involved in this message. He wanted everyone to be a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's today, in America, going to different churches, I think you could go to a black church, predominantly black church, and, gospel music, like we don't really get to experience in our church. It's an awesome thing. It's culturally different from our church, where we're kind of more on the modern side of apostolic churches, but we are predominantly white, and not completely.
Right.
But our town is predominantly white, so that it's not that there's a problem in our church. It's just that's how the demographics play out.
Yeah.
In our community, but our music's different. We're playing a lot of maybe Chris Tomlin stuff or whatever is popular right now, and then you go to a country church in Kentucky somewhere, and it's maybe all white, but then again, maybe the community is.
Yeah.
So if there's not an issue there with racism or something, I think it's a beautiful thing that they're doing things the way they do, with wooden pews and playing, old hymns.
Right. I think it's important to note too, though, as the history of the apostolic and the Pentecostal church, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think every Pentecostal needs to go back and read up on the history of our church, our movement.
Right.
But I love how, like, we have guys like William Seymour and G.T. Hayward.
Oh, G.T. Hayward is one of my favorite characters in the history of the Pentecostal church. And some of the songs that he wrote are... Right. I'm not a big fan, honestly, of singing hymns every week.
Yeah.
I like more, I like a lot of diversity in music. But I do like to still sing hymns, and I do like a lot of his really well. So,
and those that don't know them, they were African American.
Right.
And, so we have a movement that began with some, with African Americans.
Yeah, and it died when I think it's interesting. I'm a minister with UPC, United Pentecostal Church. My great grandfather, and I actually have his license at home. One of his minister's licenses at home, and I meant to get it framed, and I never have. But it's kind of neat. It's from the 40s, I believe, and he was a minister with PAW, Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, which is a predominantly black organization, at least now. And I think it's interesting the turns that our movement has taken.
Sure.
And there were some issues with ministers in the South even getting into trouble because a black pastor and a white evangelist, or a white pastor and a black evangelist would be seen in public together, or even being in a church service together. And there was that unity there, and that was looked down on, or eating together, or whatever the case may be. And there's a lot of pressure on some people in our movement because of the fact that they were, I guess those would be what you call Jim Crow laws, that were another stain on our history, but they were basically forbidding our people from fellowshipping together. And I think that, if I remember the history correctly, it's kind of why it's more almost segregated today in a lot of our churches.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of multicultural churches, and I think that's great. And I think the UPCI, as it's moved forward, has gotten more and more multicultural. And we focus now on multicultural ministries, and a lot of our churches have, daughter works that are Spanish or Burmese, which in Greenwood, I believe there's a Burmese church. There's all these different outreaches to cultural groups, and that's amazing. It's great. And then a lot of churches are very diverse.
Yeah.
But on a pretty broad scale, there is still a lot of segregation in the church.
Yeah. I guess that's true. I think when I mention the historical part of or the beginnings of our movement, it was more or less to say that the Holy Spirit does not discriminate.
It doesn't discriminate.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's the key factor, is, the principles that are in the Bible are for everyone. It's not an exclusive group.
Absolutely.
You just have to accept it.
Right, and there's no argument really against that's biblical at all.
Right.
So, like you said, and it was pretty integrated in the beginning. There was a point there where it became less integrated,
right?
And I think we're getting back to the point where we all are trying to be more diverse.
I think too. I mean, we see the things that are happening in Africa, the movements that are happening in Latin America, South America. Where thousands of people are receiving the Holy Ghost.
Right, India. There's been a lot of that in India.
Yeah,
healings, miracles. I mean, amazing things.
We don't see that a whole lot in the United States.
Right.
We see it in these outside worlds.
Right.
Or outside countries. And I think there's something to say about the United States as a whole, as the church.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think, I mean, they're rejoicing, their worship is so vibrant, and, there are cultural differences. I mean, obviously, a person from India is going to worship God a different way than someone from Seymour, Indiana is going to worship God.
Right.
But do you think cancer is any different in India than it is in the United States?
No.
Do you think, financial issues are any different than
people are having the
issues?
Same problems?
Yeah. And so what's that to say about how we worship? The problem I have is when you read the Bible, His word says that the Lord's eyes are searching throughout the whole earth, searching for a people whose whole hearts are after them, so that He may be made strong on their behalf. So while everyone else is widening this path, making it acceptable for everything and anything, I recognize that actually Jesus narrowed the path and said that there are people that I am looking for that are pursuing me only.
I think that's part of the problem in the U.S. with the church. And then this is another episode, I'm sure.
Yeah,
but
I've gone off topic a little bit.
No, that's fine. We're going to talk about this more later, I'm sure. A lot of things we talk about today we'll probably talk about in future episodes. But I do feel that in America, Christianity as a whole, conservative Christianity, and especially we see it in our movement, especially in our area, or
right?
The Midwest or the Bible Belt, or we're the northern part of the South or the southern part of the North or whatever.
Yeah.
Where we're at, I think we see it a lot, and it's this movement where we are more. Well, I mean, there's a lot of elements to it. We're more likely to go to the doctor than we are to go to prayer.
Right.
Things like that. But also, there's this issue of we're pretty spoiled. Mm-hmm. We have it pretty good. Financial trouble for us is not having enough money to go out to eat somewhere nice this week.
Or get a second car.
Right, exactly. First world problems.
Yeah.
I was complaining the other day because my Wi-Fi was so slow.
Right.
And I kind of feel bad in retrospect because it's not a problem. But those are first world problems. But then you've got this issue of the church, and this relates to race a lot. The issue of conservative churches and liberal churches as well, it's more about politics than it is about God.
Right.
So I think we've mentioned this before in discussions between the two of us. It's like Americanism is the new religion.
Yeah.
And or conservatism or liberalism or Republican Party is the church or the Democratic Party is the church.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're talking to, whether you're talking to a liberal, a progressive Christian, or you're talking to a conservative Christian, but it might be different, but it's politics before God.
Right. In
a lot of ways. And I think that's a problem in the way we relate to race as Christians in America. And a part of the reason probably where we're not seeing some of the things they see in India or Africa or Latin America.
Yeah. And, the fact that, integrating politics with Christianity, I mean, there's things on both sides that work with Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, the left and liberals' viewpoints on helping the poor and, helping each other out, living more communal living,
right.
Community.
Treating people well.
Treating people well, exactly. And then, but their standpoints on, abortion and those underlying issues that mm-hmm. conservatives are dead set against.
Right.
You got to take things from both sides. So, I mean, do we have a moderate viewpoint on things a little bit? Maybe so.
I hope so.
Yeah. But so it's not extreme this or extreme that. So I think that's what really living a Christ-centered life is supposed to be about.
I think it is. And we were talking about love being foundational in the beginning, and how we relate to people. We're talking about last episode, and I think again, it's foundational with race. One of the things that I want to see less of is people just immediately defending their own position, without first trying to empathize with the other person.
Right.
So if we're going to learn to really operate in love and really love everybody and really try to be Christ-like, we have to start trying to empathize with people who are different than us and who have different views. If I'm a white, fairly conservative person, I need to really try hard to empathize with somebody who is very liberal and black, for example, or a guy who is, a communist and who is Asian or something, whatever the case may be.
Right.
If they're very different than me, I should try all the more to empathize with them, because that allows me, not necessarily that I'm going to change my opinion.
Yeah.
But if I can try to understand things from their perspective, more understanding is a good thing.
Right.
Ignorance is what causes hate.
Yeah.
If we can have better understanding of one another, at least try to have these conversations with one another in a civil way, then we're going to be more able to love each other.
Yes. And, I'm not a Christian because I'm a conservative, and I'm not a conservative because I'm a Christian.
That's so true.
Yeah. And so those two, it's like oil and water. They mm-hmm. they really don't mix too well.
Right.
Having a political worldview one way or the other is important.
It is important, yes.
And I'm thankful every day that I was born in the United States.
Absolutely.
That I can have an opinion and that I can express my opinion.
And we're doing it right now.
Yeah, exactly. In other societies, this will be shut down immediately.
Exactly. In North Korea, for example, we would probably be shot.
Right.
Like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not even out in the air yet.
Right. We would already be dead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, it's great that we can do this. And like you said, having a political opinion is important. Your political opinion, though, a political opinion or position shouldn't dictate how you treat other people, and it shouldn't dictate how you live out your Christian principles.
Right. Bring it back to Christ's time a little bit.
Right.
We said earlier it was a hot mess politically.
It was.
And at the time period, things were building up so much with the Roman Empire, the oppression that the Romans put on the Jewish people. You know, they wanted the Messiah to be militant.
I think the disciples were like Antifa. They're like,
yeah.
Let's overthrow the government.
Right.
Let's overthrow these fascist oppressors.
Yeah.
And they thought Jesus was going to do it. And they were excited about it.
Yeah. And, I mean, 400 years prior, they get all these prophecies about what he's going to do, and they interpret it in a way that Jesus was going to come and wipe out the Romans.
And yeah, they were, and who wouldn't be excited about that? They were being oppressed, basically.
Right.
And I think they were really disappointed when they found out that not only is he not going to overthrow the Roman government, he's going to die.
Right.
They didn't get it. They still didn't get it.
Right. And unfortunately, they don't get it today.
Right.
And I mean, unless you accepted Christianity, but it's
right.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's really important to realize the love that he showed. You know, when the Pharisees asked, you know, should I pay this tax to Caesar, for instance? Mm-hmm. You know, whose face is on the coin? You know,
right. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's,
right,
and to God that which is God's. Right.
So politically, he just kind of did what he was supposed to. He followed the law of the land. You know.
Yeah, and I don't think he really espoused any of the beliefs that would be consistent with what the Roman Empire was doing.
But, you know, I think it's important to note that those were just brief little segments.
Yeah, almost like a side note.
It was like, it's not important.
Right. And I think when applying Christian principles to politics or to this issue of race or whatever, we have to make sure that our opinions, you know, politically or whatever, don't get in the way of being able to love our brothers in the church. That means if you're a very conservative Christian, you have to be able to love your brother who is a very liberal Christian.
Right.
And I see a lot of that not going on right now.
It's so true. And, you know, I get frustrated. When I read posts online of some ideology that I don't agree with.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, what's the point? He's still a follower of Christ. He still claims to be a Christian. You know, just because I don't agree with him politically doesn't mean he's not saved or he's just a Satanist or evil. Right. You know.
And I think it's unfair, but a lot of conservatives had this idea that if you're a liberal or, you know, whatever, that you want to murder babies because a lot of liberals support abortion. Well, that's unfair because I know that I know some liberal Christians who are liberal in their political philosophy because that a lot of liberal political philosophy says that we should help the poor. Yeah. And they see that Jesus says we should help the poor. Right. So they're looking at other issues and equating them with, oh, that's how Christ would act. And they're saying, yeah, but there is this issue of abortion, and they say, well, you know, it's already legal. Is it really ever going to change anyway? Right. And so I think we unfairly kind of lump them all together in this unfair category of, you know, abortionists or whatever, pro-choice. That is a real hang-up. And then I think a lot of liberals look at conservative Christians and think, oh, if they're conservative, you know, they hate poor people and they just want to help the rich and they're not living Christ-like. there's a lot of issues. It's a very complex. It's complicated. There's a lot to it.
Right. And, I think what we said before, we're not going to have the answers right now. We're just trying to find the right questions to ask.
Absolutely.
And to get the conversation going. I mean, I hope and pray that this podcast reaches millions of people.
I hope so.
That's my end goal. And so if you're listening to this right now and you just don't know really how to feel, I mean, I think the bottom line is we all have the same evidence. We all have the same structure. I mean, we just have different viewpoints to get to where we want to go. But we all start at the same thing.
Right. And we all start with the Bible, and it's funny how you can get such different interpretations from things sometimes. But I was telling Ann, we were talking about this last night, and I was talking to my wife, and we were discussing how my view of this issue of racism and what happened in Charlottesville or whatever, whether specific or just in general, my view can be so different than somebody else's who's more conservative than me.
Yeah.
Or my view can be so different from some of my liberal friends, or from some of my friends who are black and have lived that black experience that I can't live and I never will know. I can try to be empathetic toward it. I can try to be open-minded and listen, but I can't live it or experience it. And my example was this: looking at New York City. I've never been to New York, but I've seen pictures of New York. I've been to a lot of big cities. So here's my idea. Say you're in New York City, and one person is looking down at a picture in their hand of the city. Another person is looking out the window of a high rise, and another person's in the harbor looking at the city. Somebody else maybe is in an alley between two buildings, and someone else is on the International Space Station. And we're all looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
But we're going to see some very, very different images.
Right.
And that's how this issue of race is. If you were born in a wealthy black family, your views on it are going to be different. Your experience is probably going to be different than if you were born in a very poor black family. If you were born in a poor white family, your views are going to be different than those two groups and a wealthy white family. And if you grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty diverse,
right,
regardless of your race, you're going to have a different viewpoint than if you grew up, say, as a black kid in a neighborhood that was pretty much all black, or a white kid in a town where everybody was white, which is, by the way, is where I came from, is a town, basically, well, not even a town, but I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and then we moved to a town. But as a little kid, I was lived on a farm pretty much, and I only knew white people. So your views, depending on where you're coming from or whatever, your little community, your views are going to be very different because you're seeing something totally different. You're looking at the same thing, but it's a totally different angle.
That's a perfect point. We're seeing the same thing from a different perspective.
Right.
And that's, I mean, do we look at Christianity like that? Because, I mean, we come from an organization that believes truth. Mm-hmm. But we
believe in absolute truth.
But I don't think we have the absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're closer than some churches, obviously. Right. But there's so much more to it than we're not getting.
There's things we're missing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to admit that if we want to move forward. I think we have to admit that if we want to. We're not God.
Exactly.
That we have to admit that.
Yeah.
And we are not probably ever really going to know absolutely 100% all truth that is truth and live it, because here's the thing, and I think you're right, we're closer than some others, and I'm glad for the church that I've grown up in, and I've been here. You haven't been here your whole life. You've come to this from another background, another faith tradition. You're Christian, Baptist church and a Christian church.
Yeah.
But I've grown up in this. And I'm glad for that. But sometimes we can be arrogant about it, and the same thing with race. It's the same kind of thing. But we have to understand that when even the Bible And the perfect word of God, if you were to take the word of God and give it to a person, then when they read it, it's being interpreted through their worldview and their perspective. So I think it's impossible for a person to have a perfect interpretation of the Bible.
I know there's a good quote. I don't know, you remember Rich Mullins?
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved Rich Mullins.
I did too. Actually, I have to say this because it just triggered it, and I loved Rich Mullins. And I think that one of the best things I've ever listened to, me and Bryce are both music buffs, but one of the best things I've ever listened to, if you have a chance to do it, it's the Jesus record.
Right.
But the demo disc. It comes with 2 discs. One is where his band, I think, finished it after he died.
Right.
The other disc is demos of him in a church by himself with a little handheld recorder.
Just a tape recorder.
Just a tape recorder.
Yeah.
It's absolutely... And then, of course, he died, I believe it was in a car crash.
Car wreck, yeah.
And it's just absolutely almost... Even not knowing what happened after, that happened, but it's so stark and honest, and he was a pretty incredible guy, really.
I think he was one of the rare Christian musicians that was truly trying to be Christ-like.
He was sold out.
Yeah, totally sold out. In fact, he didn't own anything. He lived on a reservation, Indian reservation, I think in Oklahoma.
Really?
Yeah. And he taught the children at the school music. That was what he did.
That's devotion to Christ that probably none of our listeners will ever have. Yeah. And that we probably will never have.
And, at times he was looked down upon because he was a Grammy award-winning, multiple Dove award-winning Christian music artist.
Right.
He wrote some of the most popular Christian music of our time.
Awesome God, right?
Yeah,
he wrote that, right?
Yeah, he wrote hits for Amy Grant.
Right.
And so it's like it's Step by Step by Amy Grant. That was a Rich Mullins song. I mean, this is someone that could have had everything in the world.
It's rare that Christian artists get wealthy.
Right.
But he could have been very, very wealthy.
Yeah. And I'm not entirely sure what his financial records were, but I do know that from interviews I've read from people and that knew him always said he just gave everything away. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was going to say this: he showed up to gigs disheveled. He would have whatever he was wearing that whole day,
hair mess, or whatever.
That's what he wore on stage.
Barefoot,
barefoot many times. Mm-hmm. But listen, really go back and I love his music, and some of it's dated musically.
Some of it is, yeah, definitely.
But go back and really listen to the lyrics. Go back and really read the lyrics and what those songs were about. But I said all that to say this, that we were talking about different viewpoints. Mm-hmm. Rich Mullins had a quote, or I watched a concert online or something of him, and he was talking about scripture. He believed that he can go to every place in the world and the whole Bible would be underlined by the time he got done. Because different groups underline different parts of scripture than other groups do.
Oh, yeah.
And I always found that interesting. And because, one group is going to focus on this little thing, and then he'll go to a whole other part of the world, and they're going to focus on this, and he would underline the whole Bible by the end of his travels.
It's definitely true. Different cultural groups, probably different ethnic groups, different denominations. You see it. We all have different things we focus on, and in reality, that's probably always wrong because really the whole thing is the point.
Yeah.
But I guess trying to conclude this episode somehow, we are in a better place than we were as a country. Yeah. I think that during slavery, obviously,
right.
I think at least legally, better than the years before the civil rights movement. Now, there still is this racism below the surface. That is undeniable. Now, it is deniable if you only look at it from your own viewpoint.
Right.
So me as a white person living in southern Indiana, I could look out my window all day long and never see a problem. Yeah. But if I look out somebody else's window, it's a different story. So we have to So when in dealing with racism, and this is going to apply to a lot of different things, but in dealing with this issue of racism, we have to be empathetic. We have to try to learn to empathize with other people. And we can't just double down on our own views on everything.
Right.
We have to listen to other people's points of view and try to keep an open mind about it. Because my view is not invalid because I'm a white guy from southern Indiana, but my view is not the only point of view that is valid. So a guy from, a black guy who lives in Chicago is going to have a completely different worldview than me, but his is not any more or any less valid than mine. It's just that from his frame of reference, his worldview, things look a lot different.
Right.
And the more we can learn to look through other people's windows, don't look in other people's windows, that's creepy. But the more we learn to look from other people's windows, from their point of view.
Thinking figuratively here.
Yeah, figuratively.
No.
Don't break in their house and try to look out their window, but figuratively. The more you can look out their window and see the landscape that they see, the more we understand each other. The more we understand each other, the more we know.
Right.
The less ignorant we are. And ignorance, leads to hate. So basically, we can sum up racism by saying this. People are afraid of what they don't understand, and they hate what they fear. And that's pretty primal.
Right.
And some of us give in to that pretty easily, and that's not good. We have to learn, if we open our minds enough to take other people's worldviews into consideration and empathize with them, then we're going to be more understanding of the world. And the more we understand things, the less fearful we are, and the less fearful we are, the less hateful we are.
Right.
So that's why with modern day conveniences such as electricity, we're not afraid to go out at night anymore. But you might want a flashlight, or you might want headlights on your car. You don't want to drive out in the desert with no lights.
Yeah.
But because we have headlights on our car, we're not afraid to make that drive at night.
Right.
So I think that's what empathy and that's what understanding does, is when we empathize and try to understand other people's point of view, we illuminate that darkness, and when we illuminate it, we understand it better, and when we understand it better, we fear it less.
Yeah.
And we hate it less.
All right. So moving forward, us as Christians, what can we really do to try to better the situation? To try to, really to process what's happening in Charlottesville, or what's happening, in different, like with the Black Lives Movement, what happened in Ferguson, what's happening in Baltimore and various places like that, or what's happened in Detroit, where groups of people are being marginalized, and we have strong Christians that are believing one thing, and then progressive Christians, not to say they're not strong, but progressive Christians,
right? Conservatives and then progressives, and
that are just going head to head. How can we unify to come to finally kind of blot this cause out?
Okay, I think what we do, and this is something that has bothered me, and we talked about false dichotomies a few times, and it's a thing that always benefits those in power, right, and always benefits the media, and that it's perpetuated through this racism talk. But police and the black community, that's another issue, and that's probably another episode. But
right.
But police and the black community, it's one of these things where if I say that Black Lives Matter, then my friends who are police officers automatically think that I am anti-police. If I say Blue Lives Matter, some of my black friends think that I am turning my back on their community and saying that black lives don't matter. And if I say All Lives Matter, then people think I'm a racist.
Right.
Because a lot of the racists are using that slogan, saying White Lives Matter or saying All Lives Matter or whatever. There's no easy answer to any of it. But it's never one or the other. So I believe, I have friends who are police officers, and I absolutely support police, and I know but I think that police, and I'm going to address a few specific groups here. I think police officers, the good ones, and that's most of them, by the way, need to acknowledge that there are some bad ones. And that there are times when people are unfairly singled out and pulled over and harassed and even killed. Unfairly. That does happen. It does, not every time.
Right.
Not every incident is that type of incident, but it does happen. We have to acknowledge that. And a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction is just to deny. And they put this blue wall. And that can't continue to happen because not talking about it, refusing to have the discussion doesn't help. And same things with Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter, a lot of people involved in that movement seem to have this idea that police shootings of black people are always race motivated. Not everybody holds that position, obviously, but some people do, and at least you get the idea that a lot of them do.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's generally the case, but I think that the media wants you to think that's the case. The right media. And then the left media wants you to think that of the police officers, and yes, that's how it plays out.
Right.
So, as whether you're police officers or whether you're part of a movement of trying to stop the marginalization of some people in the black community, either way, you got to look at the truth of the matter, and that's that sometimes some people are bad in every group.
Yeah.
And then, there's no defense for the Nazis because their whole group is based on the idea of hate. So there's no defending that.
Right.
But in every group, you're going to have issues. You're going to have bad apples, whatever. But I think for our liberal Christian friends, you have to stop throwing stones at conservatives and have a conversation. And for my conservative Christian friends, you have to stop throwing stones at liberals or progressives, and you have to have a conversation.
That's important.
It is.
That's the most important thing, I think. And, it's not even having a debate where one side's going to win and the other side's going to win.
I think wanting to win is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Don't try to win.
Right.
Just have the conversation.
Yeah, just have the conversation.
Civil discourse. Civilized discourse has always been the way to eventually solving these kind of problems.
Exactly.
And that's what we tried to do in this podcast today. We try to, and hopefully we've done it at a few points. We've had our moments, but hopefully we've at some point asked a few of the right questions.
Right.
And that's really where what it comes down to. Applying biblical principles means always loving everybody.
Right.
And then you get into the hard part of Christianity, which is even harder than loving somebody you disagree with politically. But what about the guys who are racist?
Right.
What's going to change them? That's another hard discussion for another day. But it's definitely not anything we can do other than loving them.
Exactly.
And it's hard to love somebody like that.
Exactly. To state what we said earlier about Dr. King and nonviolent approach, I mean, that is it right there. That is the summation of this entire thing.
Right.
And it's love.
It is.
Yeah.
So there's a quote by Dr. King that I believe sums this up perfectly. Mm-hmm. And you probably know what I'm going to say.
Okay.
But it's, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
That's perfect. So the notion that groups like Antifa and the hard left, that their intentions are to drive out hate.
And their cause is noble.
Right. Their cause is noble, and their intentions are good. But their fact that they are using violence,
the methods just don't work.
Yeah, the method doesn't work at all. And I think that's what vice versa what the right is seeing in this situation. They're using violence, to attack these groups of people, So it's it's taking the high road, like you said,
Right.
It's just what's happening is just utter craziness.
It's chaos.
Yeah. It's anarchy.
And it is, and honestly, I would go so far as to say that it's an anti-Christ spirit,
right,
behind racism, and even behind the violence in this anti-racism movements, and the violence is absolutely against Christ's teachings and Christian principles.
Yeah.
But even the way we respond to it sometimes can be. And we have to stay firmly grounded in Christ and his teachings.
Yeah.
And that is just the bottom line.
That's right. I don't think anything else can be said besides that.
I don't think so.
It all goes back to his word.
Absolutely.
And what he taught his believers to do. And so as long as we follow the biblical principles, I don't think we can go wrong.
Love your neighbor.
Yep.
Love your enemy. There's no Jew or Greek or free or slave.
Right. That's perfect. And I think, love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Right.
I don't know anyone that really hates themselves.
No.
I mean, there's some things I do that I don't like, but
and there's some people that hate things about themselves so much that it seems like they hate themselves, but really, we all pretty much love ourselves.
Yeah. I'm going to wear clothes when I'm, when I go outside. I'm going to eat when I'm hungry.
Right.
I'm going to take care of myself when I need to take care of myself. I love myself. I need to do the same to my neighbor.
Even when you disagree with them.
Yeah.
And even when your neighbor... Especially when you do. Yeah. Right. And even when your neighbor is your enemy.
Right. So this concludes episode 3. And it concludes our 2-part episode on race and Christianity. There was so much to cover. And that's why we broke it up into a 2-part episode. Honestly, we could have done a 3 or even a 4-part episode on this subject. And it might be something we'll revisit in the future. The most important thing to remember, though, when dealing with other people, especially with other races other than yourself, whether you're black or white, red or yellow, is love. And at the risk of sounding too cliche, love does, and love always wins. Christians can still stand for biblical principles, and they can still hold the convictions that they hold so dearly. And they can still truly love their neighbor as themselves. This includes my black friends, my Mexican friends, my Spanish friends, my Asian friends, my South American friends. It includes everybody. Jesus said it was the greatest commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for your support. We really appreciate it. In fact, why don't you head over to iTunes right now and leave us a good review. 5 stars, write a comment about it, tell us how much you love this podcast. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening. We do have some exciting things coming up in store for you. We have a website at twopentecostals.com. We still have our Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. You can listen to this podcast on any platform. We're on all the major ones, especially iTunes and Google Play, Spreaker, Tuned In. It's all there. You can go to our website. There's links to listen to the podcast there. You can't miss it. Thank you so much for listening today. And thanks for subscribing. Have a good day.